3 centuries of biblical scholarship have been overturned by a single, groundbreaking discovery about the most famous fruit in human history. What scholars thought they knew about the forbidden fruit was completely wrong. For generations, we have assumed that Adam and Eve bit into an apple in the Garden of Eden. It is painted on chapel ceilings, carved into cathedral stones, and embedded so deeply in our collective consciousness that we never questioned it. But here is what will shock you. The Bible never once identifies the forbidden fruit as an apple. Not once. And now, after decades of painstaking research, scholars have finally solved the mystery of how this massive misconception took root. The answer is not what you would expect. It is not about theology or ancient traditions. It is about something far more mundane, yet fascinating, the evolution of language itself. Let's start with what Genesis actually tells us. In the original Hebrew text, the word used for the forbidden fruit is peri, a completely generic term meaning any fruit from any tree. When Moses wrote these words, he deliberately left the identity vague. The passage simply states, this vagueness was not an oversight. According to Jewish tradition, the Torah intentionally obscures the identity of the forbidden fruit, out of concern that people would constantly point to a particular species and say that it was the fruit that brought death into the world. The sages wanted to prevent any specific fruit from being forever cursed by association. So, where did the apple come from? For 300 years, scholars believed they had the answer. The prevailing theory centered on a Latin wordplay. When St. Jerome translated the Bible into Latin in the 4th century, he used the word malum for the forbidden fruit. Malum has 2 meanings in Latin. It means both apple and evil. Scholars assumed this clever pun was too tempting for medieval minds to resist. Evil fruit becomes apple fruit. Problem solved. Except it was not solved at all. Professor Azan Yadin Israel of Rutgers University spent years meticulously examining every major medieval Latin commentary on Genesis. His findings, published in 2023, shattered this long-held theory. He explains that he read through all the major and many of the minor medieval Latin commentators to the book of Genesis, and pretty much no one refers to this play on words. More perplexing, even as late as the 14th century, the commentators do not identify the forbidden fruit with the apple. If medieval scholars were not making Latin puns about evil apples, then how did the apple become so firmly associated with Eden's forbidden fruit? The real answer lies in medieval France, and a fascinating case of linguistic evolution. In Old French, the word pomme meant any fruit, exactly like the Hebrew peri. When French translators rendered the Genesis account, they wrote that Adam and Eve ate a pomme. For centuries, French readers understood this correctly. Adam and Eve ate a fruit. But language is a living thing, constantly changing. Over time, pomme gradually narrowed in meaning, and instead of referring to all fruits, it began to mean one specific fruit, the apple. This linguistic shift created an accidental revolution in biblical interpretation. Once pomme came to mean apple, French readers naturally assumed that the Genesis line meant Adam and Eve ate an apple. They began representing the forbidden fruit as an apple in their art, their stories, and their religious instruction. The apple had officially entered Eden through the slow drift of language, not through theology. The artistic evidence supports this timeline perfectly. The first depictions of Eden's fruit as an apple appear in 12th century French art. From there, the apple spread across European Christianity like wildfire. By the Renaissance, the association was so complete that even the great Michelangelo disagreed. Here is one of art history's most overlooked details. When Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling between 1508 and 1512, he did not depict the forbidden fruit as an apple at all. Look carefully at his famous fresco, and you will see Adam and Eve beneath a fig tree. Michelangelo, one of history's greatest biblical artists, believed the forbidden fruit was a fig. This was not artistic license, it was based on solid scriptural reasoning. The fig theory has impressive biblical support. After eating the forbidden fruit, Genesis tells us that Adam and Eve sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Rabbi Nehemiah reasoned that they would naturally use leaves from the same tree whose fruit they had just consumed. It makes perfect sense. Eat from the fig tree, hide your shame with fig leaves. But figs were not the only candidates ancient scholars considered. The Talmudic rabbis engaged in spirited debates about the fruit's identity. Rabbi Meir argued it was a grape, noting that wine's intoxicating effects parallel the fruit's promise to make one like God, knowing good and evil. Rabbi Yehuda proposed wheat, observing that a baby does not know to call its mother and father until it tastes grain, suggesting wheat as the fruit that brought knowledge. Others suggested pomegranates, citrons, even bananas. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text, describes the tree of knowledge as like a species of the tamarind tree, bearing fruit which resembled grapes, extremely fine, and whose fragrance extended to a considerable distance. This grape-like description influenced early Christian interpretations and appears in several medieval texts. What's remarkable is how firmly the apple took hold despite having no biblical foundation. By the 1600s, the association was so strong that when English writers coined the term Adam's apple in 1625, they explained it as the lump in a man's throat where the forbidden fruit supposedly got stuck when Adam swallowed it. The apple had become so central to the Eden story that it was anatomically enshrined in the human body. Even today, 5 million tourists each year visit the Vatican to admire the Sistine Chapel, most assuming Michelangelo painted apples in Eden. But those careful enough to look closely see the truth. The master artist chose figs. This was not rebellion against church doctrine, it was careful biblical scholarship rendered in paint and plaster. The apple's dominance created some amusing historical moments. When church reformers launched the fig leaf campaign in 1563, covering nude figures in religious art, they used actual fig leaves, perhaps unknowingly returning to the garden's original covering. Meanwhile, the very fruit they were covering with fig leaves was still being misidentified as an apple. So, what do modern scholars actually agree on? First, they universally reject the apple. Rabbi Ari Zivotofsky of Bar Ilan University states it plainly. We don't know what it was. There's no indication it was an apple. Second, they agree that the Bible deliberately keeps the fruit's identity mysterious. Third, they recognize that the apple association arose from cultural and linguistic evolution, not scriptural evidence. The leading candidates today remain the ancient proposals. Figs, grapes, wheat, pomegranates, and citrons all have scholarly defenders. Some propose it was a unique supernatural fruit that existed only in Eden and has no modern equivalent. Others suggest it was intentionally archetypal, representing all forbidden knowledge rather than any specific botanical species. What this research reveals goes far beyond fruit identification. It shows how powerfully language shapes belief, how cultural transmission can override textual evidence, and how assumptions passed down through generations can become indistinguishable from Scripture itself. The forbidden fruit became an apple not because God intended it, not because biblical authors wrote it, and not because early church fathers taught it. It became an apple because medieval French slowly forgot what pomme originally meant. This story reminds us to approach Scripture with fresh eyes, questioning assumptions we've inherited rather than earned through study. The forbidden fruit's true identity may remain mysterious, but the journey to understand that mystery teaches us something equally valuable: the difference between what the Bible actually says and what centuries of tradition have added to it. Sometimes the most profound discoveries come not from finding new answers, but from realizing we've been asking the wrong questions all along.